Welcome back. Today we're having an interview with Pete Hines. It's just been released and he dropped some details about Starfield that are very interesting. So we're going to take a deep dive into this, but there's also a Todd Howard interview as well, which I'll link down below in the description. I'd highly recommend watching both, but that's up to you.
Let's talk about it. Starfield ended the show. I gotta say, watching the trailer, breathtaking. It's one of those things from the different locations and just seeing the difference between that moon versus the populated city, just amazing. The dog fighting, just everything was so awesome. The team really outdid themselves.
It's one of those things about a Bethesda Games Studios game that I always love, and it's been the case, honestly, since, I worked on Morrowind and Oblivion and all those games that, we talked about. And for every single one, you cannot pin people down to, oh, it's about this, because it's not. Like, ultimately what those games are massive sandboxes where they give players just ridiculous amounts of freedom to say, you go figure out what kind of game you want to play and what kind of experience you want to have, because that's what this game is about. It's not us prescribing and saying, you have to do these things. And no, it's about creating this huge sandbox with over 1,000 planets so you can completely explore and say, yeah, but you don't have to. Like, it's entirely up to you to figure out, what do I want? Story? Do I want to join factions? Do I want to, build outposts and gather resources to build more cool stuff? The team really puts all of those tools in the player's hands and step back and says, now it's time for you to tell the story of Starfield, which is your.
Okay, this is really good. So I reacted to this live already, but I wanted to pick up on some really important points here, because I just made a video about the 1,000 planets that are going to be in Starfield that will, yes, be procedurally generated. And I talked about what you're actually going to do on these planets and what their significance will be. Will Starfield motivate you to want to go out and search these planets beyond just for resources? Will there be tailor-made experience on some of these planets, or will they just be empty, barren wastelands that are very boring to experience? We don't know yet. But the fact that Pete Hines has said you can literally just sit through Starfield and experience the main quest line and ignore all of these other planets and exploring the world of space completely, and even not engage with the outpost building and other mechanics like this, I think is actually really good to hear. They're definitely things that I want to experiment with and engage with myself. But I know from Fallout 4 and the settlement building response, some people absolutely hated it, felt like it was taking up space or location space on the map that could have been an interesting tailor-made location, was just a location you could build a settlement. But what Pete's saying here is that, hey, we've made all this stuff, but you can play the game this way, or this way, and we're not enforcing on you that you have to go out and harvest resources to build your own ship. In fact, he says later, you can steal a ship, which is cool. It means that I can play the game my way, which I think is really important. And I'm so glad that he said that.
Which is your story, which is going to be different than mine, which is going to be different than everybody else's. And I think that's really where the magic of a Bethesda Game Studios game happens.
Speaking about the scope of everything, Todd said that this is what an epic RPG is. What does Bethesda define an epic RPG as?
I think, again, it's sort of leaning into, look, there's a lot of folks who take a lot of different approaches on what does an open world mean. And Bethesda Game Studios always pushes themselves to the most freedom and least limitations, right? Where the items in the world are all real things. You walk into a store and there's a bunch of weapons or whatever. Like, that's not just art on a countertop. Like, you could pick those up. You could steal them and run out of it. You can create chaos. Like, we don't want to put too many limits on what the player is or isn't allowed to do.
That's interesting he says that, because in the gameplay they showed, I don't know if they just assumed that we're Bethesda fans and we know Bethesda games, but in all the other showcases like Skyrim, Fallout, they would always pick up objects in the environment or loot bodies, and then they'd look at the objects and the details and turn them around in the 360 view. We didn't see any of that in the Starfield trailer. They killed a bunch of people. They didn't look at anything. They didn't look at anything in the environment. They didn't loot any bodies. The only thing they looted was that gun in the container, which just felt like, I was like, oh, are we not having any looting in this game? And then also the mining laser, we saw him mine some iron and it was just automatically added to your inventory and there was no picking up process of those materials. So I was a little bit worried, but now he said that, I'm like, okay, good. So that's still something that's in the game. Great.
We love it when players say, I wonder what happens if and then they try it, and then they get to see like, oh my Lord, chaos ensued, and it was insanity. Everybody was shooting at me, and like that's, I think, the beauty of Bethesda Game Studios and the number of ways that they push for you to explore that. Right? It's not just one. It's you could spend thousands of hours doing nothing but shipbuilding and like focus that as all you're about, and that's okay. But you could also be about exploring every planet and finding all of the good, and that's okay. Or you could just play the main story and be like, I want a kind of experience that I'm guided through so that I kind of get to see stuff, and I might stop here and there. Oh, there's a cool side quest that I got, but you know, I want something that sort of leads me through, because I'm a little, you know, it can be a little daunting to say you can go do whatever I want. Like, ooh, I don't know what I should do. So
that's cool. So they hold your hand through the story a little bit, give you a bit of a push in the right directions on what to explore, or you can just completely go off and explore all these places on your own, or again, ignore them. I think that's great. That's given me a lot more confidence that I don't need to engage in resource harvesting and building an outpost and improving my spaceship to like carry on with the campaign. I feel like some games do put a wall in between the amount of progress you need to make before you can carry on with the main quest, and I'm like, this sucks, you know? But Bethesda are like, no, let's let the player decide what they enjoy and what they want to engage with, and I think that's good.
Some folks want a little bit of a guided path or to understand where the fun is, and no approach is wrong. Like for me, that's epic, because it says we aren't putting any limits on what you can or can't do. We're going to set you loose and just sit back and watch the beauty that you create with your own stories and the way that you solve problems or choose to spend your time in this world we've created.
I love that. And you know, what you said about, you know, those moments that maybe you experience that I don't, like those are some of the best moments if I think back to playing RPGs when I'm discussing with my friends. Oh, did you see that? No.
That's literally my YouTube channel.
Oh, did you see that? No, I didn't see that. Where did you see it? And having them go out and find it. So I think that's going to be one of those things.
We talk about that a lot, that sort of water cooler moment. Of like you come in the next day and you talk to everybody about what you did, and you're like, wait, I did that quest, but I did this completely different thing. And you sort of start to appreciate all of the choices that you could have made, you didn't even realize were an option. Like, oh, I didn't.
I hope that's true. I hope there really are lots of choices in not only the main quest, but also the side quests that have different narrative endings and different sort of ways to resolve them. That results in these exciting stories you can tell your friend. And I hope they are real roleplay decisions that you can affect the gameplay with. That sounds cool.
Even think about doing that. Like, oh yeah, I just ran in and stole his ship and shot all of his crew members and took off. Like, you can do that? Like, oh yeah, you can do anything. Like that, I think that is a special part of a Bethesda Game Studios game. And when we say epic RPG, we mean all of the stories.
So he says that you can steal a ship. And as I said in yesterday's live stream, that's awesome. Obviously, in the gameplay trailer, we see the Red Fleet land and start coming out and attacking the player. And this is like an RNG mechanic where they just land and start attacking you, like in Fallout 3 with the vertibirds, where they just spawn troops and they start attacking you in an immersive way. But the awesome thing is, when they're dead, you can just go in there, loot their ship, and then just fly away with it. And I don't know if you're in a Red Fleet enemy faction space pirate ship, can you then sneak into the enemy territory using their ship? Will you be shot down if you're in an enemy ship in a good area, for example? Like, I love the concept of disguising yourself like this, and I think that would be awesome if that's a mechanic in the game. Now, the other thing I talked about in yesterday's video, linked down below in the description, is that you can, yes, board other ships in space. There's a docking mechanic where you can come up to another ship, you can dock, and then you can just go into their ship. And there's also zero gravity fighting within the space environment, including space stations and enemy ships as well. So is there going to be like this mechanic where you can go in, just find a cool ship and be like, oh, do you know what? I'm just going to hitchhike and steal this guy's ship because I think it looks awesome. And it's like a carrying vessel, so they have no defenses or protection.
All right, you just gave me some ideas for stealing people's ships. So I appreciate that. That's going to be top on the list to do in Starfield. Now, we saw quite a bit of combat and action in the game. That seems to also be, in addition to exploring and everything, that seems to be another huge focus of the game.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, look, if you look at a game like Skyrim, which, like, everybody's played Skyrim at this point, it can, you know, a combat is a big part of that, unless you decide it's not. Like, if you're one of those folks that says, actually, I'm going to do the alchemy thing, and I just go off and pick flowers and make potions and, like, live another life in another world this way, then combat isn't part of it. But look, we know in an epic RPG, There's always bad people, shooting at you. Sometimes you got to return fire, and there's a lot of fun to be had there. And so
it's interesting. So in an epic RPG, he's saying that you have to have enemies. I don't know if that's a slip of the tongue, but obviously in Skyrim, you can't really complete the game as a pacifist. In Fallout 4, it's somewhat possible if you're very gamey about it. Now, I know in Starfield, in my character creation video, also linked below, we looked at all of the traits and perks and whatnot. There was kind of like a diplomat character that Bethesda clearly listened to us and knew that we wanted that. And he has a perk that says, on the first trait of it, obviously there's like 4 upgrading levels, so it gets better, but you can aim your gun at someone and they'll actually stop attacking you for a bit. So it may be possible to somewhat not kill everyone in the game. I don't know how this will be possible or if it is.
Providing a lot of different skills that sort of determine how good you are in combat, combined with all the different weapons in the game, and then you layer in ship combat and all of these other things, it starts to sort of paint a picture of just how broad or how deep the rabbit hole goes.
It's going to be so impressive. And you touched on it a little bit, and I want to talk about it because this was when I'm watching the video, the demo, what I saw, and it really caught my eye is around the ship. It's not just getting in the ship and that's your ship. There's so much behind it. Can you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, like every ship is customizable to the nth degree, and not just like cosmetically. I want my ship to look like this or look like that, though obviously that's totally a thing that you could do if all you care about is cosmetics. But it goes much deeper than that in terms of like what kind of shields you have, what kind of weapons you have, like what kind of ship are you building, what do you want it to be good at, what trade-offs are you willing to make or not. And then the other part of it is, of course, well, you can't just, like, it's a spaceship. Those aren't cheap. So you have to figure out, like, how am I going to do this? Where do I get the resources?
This is interesting. So we looked at the prices during the reveal, and it was so expensive. Like you're spending like 10 to 50,000 on some of these components, or he said resources. So clearly it's possible that you can craft the ship components yourself, or you can buy them. Now, we also saw one of the perks was a sort of rocket scientist or something, and you could upgrade it, and that would clearly allow you to craft more high-end space components compared to what you could craft if you didn't have that perk. There's kind of like an engineering side to spaceships, probably to weapons as well.
To build this stuff, what kind of skills do I need to level up to improve different parts of my ship beyond what I could do without those skills? So there's a lot of, again, choices in terms of you get to decide that, how much you want to put into that or not. Do you just want to give somebody money for the parts that you want? Do you want to build it? All of those things are sort of part of the fun of deciding how much do you want to interact with this and how do you want to interact with it.
Absolutely. I mean, just as you mentioned, the scope, the level of player agency, something that I feel like is going to just make Starfield such a special experience. So between Redfall, ESO, Fallout 76, and Starfield, you all are just killing the game.
Yeah, we got a few games coming out.
Now, the interviewer also asked about the delay to Starfield, and this is what Pete Hines had to say about that.
So about a month ago, you all announced some delays for both Redfall and Starfield. So I wanted to give you a chance to tell us a little bit about the decision-making process for that.
Good question.
Absolutely. Look, with all the time that goes into a game, it would be foolish to rush it out the door before it's ready. I think we have continued to sort of examine how we think about games and making sure that they are going to meet our players' expectations. Obviously, the last 2 years have really challenged us from a development standpoint. How we work now largely remotely, while a lot of our folks are not back in the office. And, that has an impact. I also think we've been thinking about things like release dates and when do we give those out and how do we make sure we give one out that we actually hit and don't have to change later. So it's not something we undertake lightly, but at the end of the day, I think what our fans expect, what Xbox fans, what Bethesda fans expect is a high quality game, and we want to do everything we can to give our teams the time to fully realize the games they're making.
Yeah, and I think that's what it's all about, right? Like delivering an amazing experience for the players out there. And so
now, if you enjoyed that, there's actually an interview with Todd Howard as well, which I'll link down below in the description because he reveals even more information, especially regarding the 1000 minutes quote and lots of other details like that. So check that video out below and I'll see you there. Drop a like on this one if you enjoyed it though. I'd really appreciate the support.